Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at a moment that many once believed would never happen. Crimea lost by Russia. Ukraine takes it back is not just a headline. It is a story of time, pressure, resistance, and a dramatic reversal of what was long described as permanent. For years, Crimea stood as a symbol of Russian power and Ukrainian loss. Its return represents far more than a shift on the map. It marks a collapse of assumptions, a failure of control, and a turning point that reshaped the entire course of the war. When Russia took Crimea in 2014, it was swift and shocking. The operation unfolded with speed and confidence. Ukrainian forces were unprepared, the international response was cautious, and within weeks, the peninsula was absorbed into Russian control. Moscow framed the move as irreversible. Crimea, the narrative went, was forever. Over the years that followed, this idea was reinforced again and again through military buildup, political rhetoric, and heavy propaganda. Crimea became the crown jewel of Russia's southern strategy, home to key naval bases, airfields, and missile systems. It was presented as untouchable. For Ukraine, the loss was deeply painful. Crimea was not just territory, it was history, identity, and sovereignty. Yet, from the very beginning, Ukraine never accepted the loss as final. Officially and politically, Crimea remained Ukrainian, but reclaiming it was not immediately possible. Ukraine first had to survive, to defend itself, to adapt to a new kind of war. Years of fighting hardened its military, reshaped its doctrine, and forged a society used to sacrifice. What began as resistance slowly turned into preparation. As the broader war intensified, Crimea's role changed. What once appeared to be Russia's strongest position gradually became one of its greatest vulnerabilities. Geography played a critical role. Crimea is a peninsula, dependent on limited supply routes by land, sea, and air. Holding it required constant logistics, steady morale, and uninterrupted command and control. Any disruption to those systems multiplied pressure inside the fortress. Ukraine understood this perfectly. Rather than launching a dramatic assault, Ukrainian strategy focused on erosion. Precision strikes targeted logistics hubs, ammunition depots, command centers, and air defense systems. Each strike alone might have seemed limited, but together they sent a powerful message. Crimea was no longer safe. The rear was now the front. At first, Russian officials dismissed these attacks as minor or accidental. Publicly, confidence remained high. Privately, defenses tightened. Troops were redeployed, air defenses multiplied, security measures increased. These were not signs of strength, but signs of anxiety. Soldiers stationed in Crimea, once confident they were far from danger, now lived under constant alert. Night after night, alarms sounded. Equipment had to be moved, hidden, dispersed. The sense of permanence faded. Morale is fragile in such conditions. Russian troops began to question why they were there, especially as losses mounted on other fronts. Crimea demanded resources at a time when resources were already stretched thin. Reinforcing the peninsula meant weakening positions elsewhere. The war was becoming a series of difficult choices, and Crimea was at the center of them. Civilians felt the pressure too. Years of occupation had brought surveillance, repression, and forced loyalty, but it had also promised stability. As military activity increased and security tightened, daily life grew harder, tourism declined, economic activity slowed. The idea that Crimea was calm and secure no longer matched reality. When people stop believing that those in power will remain, control begins to erode. The critical moment came when Moscow's language began to change. What had once been described as permanent control became strategic positioning. Talk of flexibility and redeployment quietly entered the conversation. For Ukraine, this shift was unmistakable. It signaled hesitation, and in war, hesitation is opportunity. Ukraine acted quickly and decisively. Intelligence networks intensified their work, surveillance increased, communication intercepts revealed confusion among Russian units. Orders were delayed, contradictory, or absent altogether. Withdrawal, one of the most dangerous operations in warfare, was now on the table. And Ukraine was ready. As Russian forces began to pull back from certain positions, vulnerabilities multiplied. Roads intended for retreat became choke points. Supply convoys jammed together under observation. Bridges and infrastructure critical to movement came under pressure. Retreating units found themselves exposed, neither fully defensive nor capable of offense. Ukraine's response was instant and calculated. Rather than chasing headlines, Ukrainian forces focused on isolation. Strong points were cut off, defensive lines were bypassed. Units left behind to delay, advances often surrendered. Unwilling to fight for ground, their own leadership seemed prepared to abandon. Equipment was left behind, communication broke down, control slipped away piece by piece. This was the moment Russia lost Crimea, not in a single dramatic collapse, but in a chain of failures that fed into one another. Command structures fractured, morale collapsed, the narrative of inevitability evaporated. Once that happened, the outcome became only a matter of time. As Ukrainian forces advanced across the peninsula, they did so carefully. Urban areas required restraint. Infrastructure had to be preserved. Civilians had to be protected. Liberation is not simply about pushing an enemy out. It is about restoring order and trust. Ukrainian leadership emphasized discipline and control, understanding that how territory is retaken matters as much as the fact that it is retaken. The raising of Ukrainian flags across Crimea carried enormous symbolic weight. For Ukrainians, it was a moment of validation. Years of loss, sacrifice, and endurance had not been in vain. What had once seemed impossible had been achieved. For Russia, the loss was devastating. Crimea had been central to national pride and strategic identity. Its return to Ukraine shattered the myth that conquest could be made permanent through force alone. International reaction was immediate. Allies saw confirmation that sustained support mattered. Observers who once spoke of frozen conflicts reconsidered their assumptions. Military analysts dissected the campaign, noting how patience, precision, and pressure overcame even heavily fortified positions. Crimea's return became a case study in modern warfare, yet the story did not end with victory. Crimea's liberation brought immense challenges. Infrastructure damage had to be repaired. Displaced families needed support. Years of occupation had left deep social scars. Ukraine faced the task of rebuilding governance while ensuring security and justice. Liberation was not an end point, but the beginning of a long and complex process. For Ukraine, Crimea's return reshaped national identity. It proved that loss was not permanent, that time could favor those who refused to surrender their claims. It strengthened unity and belief at a critical moment in the war. For Russia, it forced uncomfortable questions about leadership, strategy, and the true cost of aggression. Crimea lost by Russia and taken back by Ukraine will be studied for decades, not because it was dramatic, but because it was methodical. It showed how control erodes when logistics fail, morale weakens, and belief disappears. It demonstrated that even the strongest fortresses depend on confidence to survive. Above all, it delivered a powerful lesson. Occupation is never truly stable. Force can seize land, but it cannot erase identity or extinguish resistance. Time does not always legitimize conquest. Sometimes it exposes its fragility. Crimea's return marked the moment the war changed. It broke the illusion of permanence and rewrote the narrative of power. And after that moment, nothing in this conflict could ever be seen the same way again.